So the Kislev roster just dropped, showing us all the units in the Kislevite army. This ultimately gives us a better idea of what to expect from Kislev as a faction and how they might play. So we're going to go through all of that and all of the units and talk about what they can do. Do understand though, this is mostly just me talking about it without visuals. So starting off with the Lords, we're of course going to have TZARINA KATARIN at the top of the pile. She's a caster, she is decent in melee, but she's mostly about getting those icy kills. She has a legendary weapon called Frostfang, which brings a bunch of abilities, one of which being that big icy shard spell that comes out the ground that we've seen previously. And while she can be on foot or sliding around on ice as we've seen as well, she can also have a war horse or a war bear mount. So she's got some mount options, she's not always going to be on foot or sliding around on ice at least. So she's one of our legendary lords. We just saw the other one then, Supreme Patriarch KOSSARS, or Kostaltin, not sure how it's pronounced yet. So he seems to be a melee lord, kind of similar to Volkmar, very religious, relying on the faith, but maybe just a little bit more mental. He's apparently unkillable somehow. Ursin's ward is one of his abilities. Kostaltin is an unkillable paragon of his people. What that exactly means, I don't know. Will he actually be unkillable? Will he just have a really big physical resistance? Will he just not be able to die somehow? He also has a horse or bear mount option as well, so he seems more like a melee lord that's going to be more about supporting the troops, sticking by his boys and using his faith to buff them up. So that's your two legendary lords. Then we have the Boyar, who seems to be your generic melee lord, good at fighting in crowds, perhaps getting stuck in with the boys on the front line, perhaps inspiring them with some abilities as well to help keep them in the fight. And then a couple of generic wizard lords as well, the Ice Switch of Ice, obviously using the lore of Ice, and then the Ice Switch of the Tempest lore, which is another new lore, which is described as Lore of Tempest, which speeds allies and sends enemies to a swift death, harried from all sides by incredible blizzards and biting cold. So it doesn't really tell us anything about it, other than it sounds pretty much like the Lore of Ice, but we'll have to see what the difference really is. But these Ice Witches and the Boyar both can have a horse or bear mount as well. So that is all of our Lord options. On to the heroes, first off with the melee hero, the support hero, the Patriarch, which we saw in the recent demo. Going to be a melee hero that's also great at inspiring and can also heal friendly troops. So another good one for supporting select groups of troops, whether the front line or maybe a flanking group of cav. And what mounts can you have? You've guessed it, horse or bear. And guess who else can have a horse or bear mount? It's the Frost Maiden heroes, of Ice or the Tempest lore. These two will likely be pretty terrible in melee and will be very squishy, but they will of course be full-on casters. So if you don't bring KATARIN or the Ice Witch Lord, then bringing one of those two is going to be your choice caster option. So that's your heroes. On to the melee missile troops, the hybrid units if you will, starting with the KOSSARS, who have bow and axe and a bow and spear version. We've seen these before, we know what to expect. They're cheap infantry, low tier melee troops with the ranged option, one better against infantry, one better against large. Likely going to be using these a lot in early campaign, and apparently they can hold their leadership pretty well, as Kislevites are just damn tough like that. And then we have the Streltsy, probably going to be a mid to high tier unit, as they do have that powerful ranged attack, which is armor piercing, much like handgunners. And of course it doubles up as a two-handed axe, so they're pretty good in melee as well. So they'll offer some armor piercing range damage, whereas the KOSSARS will only be non-armor piercing most likely. And then we have the two different kinds of Ice Guard, bow and dual sword, and bow and glaive. We've seen bow and glaive before, they're anti-large, with that icy bow as well. And then the dual sword will probably be more anti-infantry. So these two kind of seem like they're going to be mid-tier versions of the KOSSARS. Kind of the same. They've got a ranged attack, and one of them's good against infantry, and one of them's good against large. Same with the Ice Guard. They've both got a ranged attack. One's good against infantry, one's good against large. And of course, they have all the icy frostbite stuff on their attacks as well. So they're a little bit different, and likely far more effective than the KOSSARS will be. So that's hybrid infantry. Now to just pure melee infantry. We've got the armored KOSSARS first and foremost. These are the units that we saw in one of the trailers, which had a pistol and the axe and great mace. I kept calling them Sargard because they kind of look the same, but they are armored KOSSARS. So they have that pistol, which is likely going to be short range, maybe 90 range, which gives them a nice ranged attack just to soften their enemy up before they get to them, or to maybe flank round and use that before they charge into melee. The axe version probably good against light infantry, with the great mace being armor piercing. So you've got those, I imagine, mid-tier unit. And then we've got the big boys, the high-tier Sargard, sword and shield, and the great sword versions, which we've kind of seen previously. So we know what to expect from those. Those are our beefy frontline holding infantry if we want them. The sword and shield version likely being tougher and better at holding the line, while the great sword version is better at dealing out, I imagine, armor-piercing damage. And then on to another part of the Kislevite game, their cavalry, beginning with Kossovite Dervishes, a unit we haven't seen yet. They seem to be a light melee cav with the ability to vanguard deploy, so going to be a good one for sneaking after missiles and artillery and getting those, but maybe not a lot else. If you want some more proper melee cav though, you bring the winged lancers. They are very quick despite being a pretty medium to heavy cav. Going to make great use of their charges, good for hammer and anvil. Imagine Empire Knights or Reichsguard, just a bit faster. Of course, we saw them in the recent demo. As we did the Griffon Legion. These are the big boy heavy cav. Pretty much the same as the winged lancers, to be honest. Just a little bit slower, but much heavier, hit a lot harder, better stats, so kind of the same, just a better version of them. And then we have the lovely War Bear Riders. These look absolutely brutal. They are the anti-large cav choice for Kislev, so it's good that they do have an anti-large cav, and it's an elite one at that. So they're probably going to be up there with Demigriffs and Blood Knights and Grail Knights and all those top anti-large cavs. The War Bear Riders will likely give them a run for their money. So that is all the melee cavalry options for Kislev. Now to the missile cavalry options. Beginning with the Horse Archers, pretty much straight up basic skirmish cav, nothing too special. They'll have vanguard deployment. They'll be similar to the Dervishes, just with that bow attack, but perhaps a tiny bit better than other skirmish cavs in melee. And then we have the two kinds of war sled, the light version and the heavy version, which aren't really cavalry, more chariots. Seems like these will be a kind of Scourge Runner chariot deal. They'll be quite a quick chariot to charge around. They'll have that long ranged attack as well, so they can keep the pressure up. Or they could just straight up blast into melee and use their bears, because, you know, they're bears. I imagine the only real difference will be the light ones will have less armor, but maybe a little bit faster, with the heavier sled being better armored, but slower. Likely a nice option for harassing the enemy or for supporting some cav with. And then of course we do have a couple of monsters for Kislev as well. The Snow Leopard, which we've seen in trailers, and the Elemental Bear, which we saw in the demo. Going to be very fast, good at harassing missiles and artillery. Sounds like it might be anti-large, but I'm not quite sure from the description. But it should be a powerful single entity anyway, maybe good for chasing after vulnerable wizards, as it's going to be quite quick. So probably going to have a kind of brood horror feel where it's a very fast single entity that charges around. And then of course we have the Elemental Bear, the behemoth icy bear thing, which is pretty much a Dreadsaurian bear. Also has that breath attack as well. It's also unbreakable, so going to be super tough to get rid of, going to have a lot of HP and going to be able to do a lot of damage to all kinds of units. But naturally will be very expensive, I'm sure. And lastly, to the one piece of artillery they have Little Grom, the polar bear cannon that we saw, pulled around by polar bears, so it's kind of a chariot, but it's a fast moving artillery. It will be able to keep up with an army if you're on the go, so that's a really nice ability, and it has that long range kind of cannony mortar, so it gives the Kislevites that long range option. So there it is, the entire Kislev roster and all the units. There's 25 altogether, including the variants, which is quite small when compared to Warhammer 2 factions, which have a bunch of DLCs, as they're sitting around 30 to 40 units. This is a good thing though, I think, because we are going to have 6 or 7 new factions to learn on Warhammer 3's release, and that's a hell of a lot of units, so making the main armies a little bit smaller is a good idea, and of course it leaves room for DLCs later down the line. The Kislev army on the whole seems to be doing a few interesting things. The first one being that it's actually going to have some decent infantry, it seems like, because the other two human factions, Bretonnia and the Empire, don't really have great infantry. So they're going to bring that to the table. Also all the hybrid infantry, lots of missiles going to be around. How's that really going to play into things, as missiles are generally a bit of a meta right now in both campaign and multiplayer. So are all those missiles going to make Kislev super OP? We'll have to see. And then of course you've got a bunch of great cavalry options. You've got the lighter, faster stuff, but also the heavier, big, hard-hitting stuff, the anti-large bears. They're going to have a lot of tools at their disposal. Not to mention the monsters, like the big old elemental bear and that leopard as well. Those are going to change things up a little bit than what human factions might be used to. And with having an artillery as well, it's going to give Kislev a lot of options to either play super offensive and chase after the enemy and play the rush game, or they can sit back with their artillery, with all their missiles, and play the defensive game. So it should be one of those fairly flexible factions with a lot of potential different playstyles. Cav heavy, missile heavy, infantry heavy, or the one I'm most excited about, bear heavy. So yes, overall going to be very exciting to see how Kislev plays out. We can look at all this stuff and look at all the units, but it's impossible to really get a feel of them until we get to play them properly. But there we go. How you feeling about the Kislev roster? Let me know. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the future.